In elementary school, liked history? Raise your hands. Oh, I'm in trouble. I hated history. It was names and dates and places that you had to memorize, and then you regurgitated them on the test, and then you forgot about them. Right? Yes. But then my mother took me on a trip looking for dead people, genealogy, and we found stories of my ancestors. And I'm going, if we can find stories, there's got to be stories of those names and dates and places that we have to memorize for school. That's when I started loving history. Today, I hope I give you some stories, so those that didn't raise your hand going, oh, history's kind of cool. So, we're also going to put some myths, put those away, and kind of make you think about what you have learned when you were in that education in elementary school. Today, Lewis and Clark gets a paragraph. I substitute taught and saw that, and I wept. Because I have done a whole week class, 4 hours a day on Lewis and Clark, and we got a paragraph. So, first president of the United States. Thank you. Remember, I'm a teacher. I expect participation. Second. Very good. Most kids say Lincoln. Third. One of the best presidents in my mind. When he took office, the United States was, everybody could travel 50 miles and they'd hit the ocean. Okay? That was the extent of the United States. Now, we have a waterway on that west coast of the United States. Thomas Jefferson had heard about some rumors that a very important area was possibly going to be sold. He sent a gentleman and said, go to France, make a deal, we're giving you a budget of $10 million, don't come home without it. Why is that so important? Why was he willing to almost triple the U.S. budget for that port? Why? Access to the Mississippi River. We have access for imports. But the ones in here over the Appalachian Mountains, we don't have access. So they don't be able to have goods. So we need that port so that we can get our exports up that river. Well, did he get that port? Yes. Yes. But what came with it? The whole rest of it. Said, nope, we're not selling you the port. We're going to give you the entire watershed of everything that flows in to the Mississippi for $15 million. Good land deal? Yes. We had no idea what we purchased. Yeah, I'd take 4 cents an acre for land out here, even dry land. But he had no idea. So he said, we've got to get out there and find out what is there. So he had a secretary. His name was Meriwether Lewis. He was a captain in the military. He said, I want you to get a group. I want you to go up the Missouri River and find out what is out there and find a waterway to the Pacific Ocean. Okay? So he had a big task in front of him. So he accumulated other military men, some frontiersmen that knew how to take care of themselves, in the wilderness, single, to go up the river with him. His co-person was William Clark. He had previously been in the military, but had retired from the military. But Meriwether recruited him back in. When he retired and wanted to come back in, the military says, you're only a lieutenant. But Lewis and Clark says, we're going to go. We're not going to tell the other men, but we're going to go as co-captains. So they went as co-captains. Now, before they left, Lewis purchased something to go with them. Does anyone know what he might have purchased? A what? Does anybody know the breed?
Newfoundland.
A Newfoundland. A Newfoundland dog. He spent $200. That's 1803. Equivalent today, 2,200. Okay? $200 for a quadruped. Why? Why do you think he purchased a dog? Well, let's learn a little bit about this dog. First of all, they come from a region that is surrounded by water. They come from a province called Newfoundland. Their cousin is from the other island, Labrador. Okay, so they're kind of related to the Labrador. But they're surrounded by water. What is going to be the main job of those living on that island? Fishermen. So they're going to have Newfoundlands. They're going to get in their boat, make sure they have their nets, their dog, and they're going to go out into the water. They're then going to get their spot, they're going to throw out the net, and they're going to let it sit there. I don't know how long, but after a while, they're going to throw the dog overboard. But he's going to wait there by the side of the boat, and they're going to put that rope that's hooked to that net in his mouth. That dog is going to swim around and draw up that net, pull that net to the boat. Fisherman's going to get that net into the boat. We're going to get that dog back into the boat, go to shore. Once we're on shore, we'll get it out of the boat, put it in our cart, and who's going to pull that cart? A male Newfoundland can pull up to 2,000 pounds. Okay? But he was in the water. Let's talk about this water. Way north. Cold water. A Newfoundland has 2 coats of hair. He has a short hair underneath that's very thick. It acts like a snorkeler's, a wetsuit. And then he has a long fur on top of it. And it's slick. And so the water kind of just sheds off. His feet, his toes are webbed. In between the little toes is an extra layer of skin. So when he paddles, and he doesn't doggy paddle like most dogs, he does a modified breaststroke. Okay? He has a very large and strong tail. This is his rudder. While he's swimming, if he wants to change direction, his tail is what's going to change his direction. I told you he had a rope in his mouth. Those extra flues, I used to have one of these, so I speak from experience, okay? Those extra flues that hang down on some dogs, well, what that is when he's in the water with that rope, those flues cover over the opening in that mouth so that he can be in the water and he's not going to drown. But when he gets out or drinks water and shakes, I have spots on my ceiling still. Okay? He also, his ears lay down, but again, they almost close shut when he's in that water. So knowing those facts, why did Lewis buy this dog? How were they traveling? By boat. They're going to have a waterway all the way to the Pacific. Okay? Was it worth the $200, do you think?
Yes.
Well, let's find out though. On the way, they were almost by right where Omaha would become about a decade later, 2 or 3 decades later. They were beaver hunting. They threw the dog overboard and they were chasing each other. And he would be able to hunt and get beavers. He was also a good, their nose, they're still used today to find victims after earthquakes or 9/11. Their nose is magnificent. They're very protective. And so he was a protector. In Idaho, they were in there and a black bear came into the camp. The dog reared up, now on 4 legs, his head's about right here. So this dog is going to rear up and scare that bear away. He was a protector. He was a hunter. He helped all the time those 2 years that they were coming and going. Was he worth it? Now, on the way back, we lose track of him. The last time that the journals reference him, I never addressed the name. We didn't know, if you read any books that were published before 1850 or 1956, his name was Sacagawea, because Clark had horrible penmanship. And so they were being, translated or interpreted, and it became Sacagawea. But then the University of Nebraska were kind of studying it, and they noticed that Lewis and Clark were naming things all the way. And they came across a Seaman Creek, S-E-A-M-E-N. And they're going, they've named everything else after people that were on the trip or back in Washington. Where did this Seaman Creek come from? So then they went back to when they described the dog and looked at his penmanship, going, we made the C from the E. And the M, we thought were 2 C's. So his name was Seaman. Okay? But like I said, if you read an old history book, it was Sacagawea. On the way back, the last report was the mosquitoes are so bad, it even makes our dog cry. Now, they had traveled a year and a half with this dog. It was it was Meriwether Lewis's dog, but the other corpsmen started to call it our dog. Our dog did this. Our dog scared away buffalo and beaver and bear or whatever. So if it became endearing, my old German grandma used to say, no news is good news. So I'm taking it, nothing happened to the dog, and he made it back to St. Louis. No news, okay? But we've lost him in history up in Idaho with bothering mosquitoes. Of course, he's a quadruped, 4-legged animal. Does he get any reward or payment or anything? No. But was he valuable? Very valuable. Okay, so we have our first that was joined in. Our second one is owned by Clark. And who is owned by Clark? York. York grew up with Clark. They actually, York is just a little bit older. They grew up together. When he got old enough, mid-teens to later teens, they made York Clark's body servant. Not bodyguard, a body servant. Laid out his clothes, helped him dress, helped him undress wherever he went. York went with him to make sure that his cases were there, his trunks. He was his body servant. Clark is going on this trip for 2 years. Is his body servant going to go with? You bet he is. But he is a slave. He's a black man. Slaves were not allowed to handle or use a gun. Slaves are not allowed to administer medicine. On the trip, as they're heading up around Sioux Falls, one of the gentlemen becomes very ill. York cares for him, gets him sulfur water. They did take some medicine, brown mass and blue mass. That's a whole other story. But York cared for him. Yes, they lost, but current medicine has looked at those journals. I have a very good friend that does the medicine of Lewis and Clark, and his guesstimation, he died of appendicitis. He would have died of it even if he was in St. Louis. So, he did medicine. He also went out hunting with one of the best hunters. Dugard was one of the best hunters, and York became one of the best hunters, as pictured here. He's carrying home a deer, carrying it back to the ship. They had to hunt every day. With the 32 individuals going up the river, as much as they were working, every man had to eat 12 to 15 pounds of meat every single day, because they were expending that much energy. So they needed those calories. While they didn't have the fresh vegetables, the fresh protein is what they were able to get. So hunting became a daily chore for many of them. When they encountered Indians along the way, and there were several tribes. They had seen white men because the mountain men had been through, there had been other, or whatever. But some of them had never seen white, but the black man. Clark and Lewis were both 6 feet tall. We know that, they wrote it in the journals. But Clark describes York as taller than he was. He was so strong, he could stand flat-footed and do backflips. Two of the young men were horsing around by the fire one night, and he was getting disgusted with them, picked them up by the ruff of the necks, and held them off the ground. He was strong. They would encounter those Indians. They'd never seen a black man. They would go up to him, lick their fingers, and rub. And he would just kind of laugh and part his hair, but it was just as black there too. He was magnificent to them. He just was an oddity and well liked by the Indians. He also, now, he didn't speak most of the tribal languages, but he would tell stories. He was very animated. Oh, he would have fit right into the deaf world by telling stories, by being big, and the children would just giggle or scream. Or this is all written in the journals of those that kept journals. He was called by some of the Indians magic. Some of the chiefs would bring their women and want the magic. I'm not going anywhere there. Okay? But they wanted that. He was an oddity. He was a welcome wagon. They get to the Pacific coast. And so we've got to make, we've got a winter here. Okay, what are we going to do? Should we build our camp, our fort or camp close to the ocean or further up where it's a little bit drier? And so they presented it out to everyone that was with for a vote, a democratic vote. Does the slave get to vote? Yes. First time in American history, a black man got to contribute to a decision of a democratic decision. I think that's pretty historic. That needs to be in history books, okay? First time he gets to vote. They head back, they build their fort, they're headed back to St. Louis, they're back now in civilization. He's been able to hunt. He's been able to give out medicine. He's voted. He was an equal. Now we're back in civilization. He's back to a slave. Don't think bad of Clark. Clark knew that if he freed him, he still doesn't have very many rights. But after many, many years of pleading and begging and some turmoil, Clark finally said, fine. And actually even helped him get him set up in a dray wagon freight company. Well, the thing is, freed blacks can only deal with other freed blacks because the whites aren't going to deal with them. There's not very many of them that need freight moved, so his business failed. This is where we lose track of our slave York. This is where there's different stories. I'm going to share, you can make your own opinion. The first one is, he was on his way back to Clark to beg forgiveness, take him back, when he contracted cholera and died. Story one. Story two is, business failed. He remembered being so honored with the Indian tribes that he headed up to the Wyoming and Idaho area, and that he lived the rest of his life out there. You decide. But when they did get back, all of the military men got double pay and 360 acres. York got nothing. But was he valuable? Yes. All of those things that he helped with. But he got nothing and lost into history. Our third, one of my favorites. They traveled the first year up the Missouri into South Dakota. They wintered there the first year. They wintered with the Mandans. While they were there, they were talking with the Indians and said, now, okay, we're going to be heading west and we're looking for the waterway to continue. And they're going, nope, you're going to hit big mountains. You're going to need horses. Lewis and Clark's, where are we going to find horses in the middle of the wilderness? I said, not a problem. We have, or there's Indians back there. He says, we travel over there a lot. They're the Shoshones. They have horses. And trade with them, I think you'll be fine. So Lewis and Clark meets our next. It's a young lady. She's about 14. We don't know for certain, but a good guess is about 14, 15 years old. Who grew up, was born into the Shoshone tribe in the Idaho area. When she was about 9, she was kidnapped by the Mandan and Hidatsas and drugged back to the South Dakota area. She is a smart girl. She is a very bright girl. She endears herself to one of the families in the Hidatsa family. They endeared themselves to her so much that they actually gave her a belt of blue beads. Blue beads are the most valuable because blue in nature, to dye, is very hard to come by. So to have blue beads, you were honored. And so her Hidatsa family gave her this. She was part of their tribe now. She grew up Shoshone, so she knows Shoshone. She came and learned their language very quickly, of the Hidatsa language. When she was about 12, 13, a fur trader came, and this is where it's in the little mix, either won her or just wanted her. Don't know. But Chris, no, my name just went up. Yeah, Charbonneau, thank you, my name just went up. Charbonneau wanted our little girl and became his wife. So, back to Lewis and Clark, says, we need horses. We need to have somebody that speaks Shoshone. We have fur trader that his wife speaks Shoshone. Well, they called in, not speaking to her though, said, we need to have, we need to have a Shoshone speaker. And he says, well, my wife speaks Shoshone. We're not taking women. Well, he says, I don't speak Shoshone. I speak French and Hidatsa. So the way that I speak to her is in Hidatsa. So if you want a Shoshone speaker, you're going to have to take the both of us. Lewis and Clark was not very happy, but they needed a Shoshone speaker. So, I forgot to tell you, she was pregnant. Okay? But anyway, in the Shoshone language, or in the Shoshone culture, a child really aren't given a name until they hit maturity. She was 9 when she was stolen. Hadn't probably quite hit maturity, so she probably didn't have a name. Because, and I don't care how you pronounce her name, I pronounce her name Sacagawea. Sacagawea. If you live in South Dakota, it's Sacagawea. I don't care how you pronounce it. What you need to remember is what she did. So, we have this young lady, which I believe the Hidatsas gave her that name. In the Shoshone language, the closest thing to Sacagawea, whatever, is boat pusher. But in the journals, Lewis and Clark call her bird woman. In the Hidatsa language, Sacagawea is bird woman. Okay? So, 14-year-old girl. The February before they left, she gives birth to little Pomp. Two months later, she leaves with baby on board with her husband and join them. As they're traveling, she's just magnificent. If you've ever gone up to South Dakota and North Dakota, they love this woman. There are many statues out there where Lewis and Clark are here. She's standing to the side and she's pointing the way. And even on the plaque, what is she known for? What are some of the things she's known for?
Interpretation.
Interpreter. What else?
Guide.
Guide. Okay? Interpreter, we'll get to that. Guide, she was 9 years old. A hostile tribe is dragging you. Are you going to remember the route? And there's no big signs. Highway 26, this way. Okay, there's no signs. The statues, where she's pointing the way, in my opinion, she's saying, guys, you stay here. I'm going to go to the bathroom over there. She didn't know the way. What she did is when they got to 3 rivers, she said, oh, this is Beaverhead Rock. It looks like a beaver. She recognized it. This is where she was stolen from at 3 Rivers, or 3 Forks River. She recognized it. She didn't guide them there. So as a guide, okay, kind of, as an interpreter, she speaks Shoshone and Hidatsa. So when they do end up getting with the Shoshones, this is how the translation went. Lewis spoke English to Pierre Kazak, who spoke English and French. He then spoke French to Charbonneau. Charbonneau spoke Hidatsa to Sacagawea. Sacagawea then spoke Shoshone to the chief. Have any of you played telephone? She's just one cog in that interpretation. Yeah, she interpreted, but Pierre Kazak doesn't get credit for that. Charbonneau doesn't get credit for that. So as an interpreter, okay, what she really is, she is a young Indian woman with a baby coming down the river in a boat. So, we have woman with baby headed west. They get to Fort Clatsop. Again, they're going to vote. She's a woman. Does she get to vote? Yes. First woman that got to make her opinion known in a U.S. matter. Awesome. Okay? She also was able to, as I said, she was very bright. She was also very level-headed. At one point, one of the canoes, one of the pirogue, tipped. It had Clark's maps and the journals and all of their equipment, and it was floating down the river. And here, they're going down, and she started gathering. And her husband, who was probably in about his 30s, would almost drown her. He didn't know how to swim. But she was able to shuck him off and gathered all of these things. We wouldn't have a lot of the journals if it wasn't for her. So we came back. we drop them off. We drop off Toussaint and we drop off Sacagawea at Fort Mandan. They settle up with Toussaint and pay him. And Sacagawea received nothing. She was just as valuable as all of the others. The thing is, going down that river, we have mama and baby. We have a big black man, big dog, going down the river. Indians are seeing this. They're thinking, war party? No. No war party is going to take a woman, and especially a woman with a baby. What this is a floating circus. It was peace. It was better than any white flag that you could have imagined. So, as a guide, a little bit. As an interpreter, a little bit. But what she was a flag of peace to those Indians of what she represented. I can't imagine the hardship that she went through. Now, her fate, again, there's different stories. One, after she had her baby, again, they left in April. Before they hit Idaho, when they were in Montana, she became violently ill. York found a spring, a sulfur spring, and brought this fresh water back and administered to her. She got better. I have a doctor friend who has studied Floyd's and has studied that, and he has come to find, kind of thinking that she got sick from or post maternal sickness, that she had, she was losing weight and she was not feeling, and fever, and even today we treat it with sulfa. They were curing her and didn't even know it. So we have, and so when she came back, they left. But then a few years later, then Toussaint brings down the baby to Clark, because Clark promised, I will educate this baby. They called him Pomp or Pompy. This little child left, he was 3 months old when he left, 18 months when they returned. Could you imagine, in Fort Clatsop, he was learning to walk. When you have watched your children, your nieces, nephews, your grandchildren learn to walk, what comes to your face? A smile, a comfort. Could you imagine these scruffy, dirty, smelly military men with a year-old toddling and learning to walk? Did he have value? Boy, he had value. He certainly did. So we have mama and baby, but again, they received nothing. Pomp did go down to St. Louis. Clark did not necessarily adopt, but took them as guardians. And he did not live with Clark because Clark's wife, Julia, would not allow it, but lived in the house next door. Okay? He educated him. And Jean-Baptiste actually went to Germany, spent some time with the Prince of Germany. Pomp came back to the United States and was a true guide. He guided the Mormon battalion from New Mexico to California. He was a fur trader. He searched for gold. He was on his way to Montana in 1866 to search for gold there when he got sick and died en route. And he died at the age of 61 in Oregon. So, I've introduced you to 4 members of the Corps of Discovery. None of them were paid a dime. But were they valued? Were they worth them going on this trip? Ladies and gentlemen, you may think, wow, I don't get credit for that. Does that mean we don't do it? Does that mean that we, stop being kind to our neighbors and kind to our fellow citizen? You don't know what your value is. And you may not be told, but everyone sitting in here, you have value, just like these 4 members. Thank you. Questions, comments, queries?
Did Sacagawea also find her brother?
Yes. When they were with the Shoshones, the clock right there bugs me. When they were with the Shoshones, they were, Clark and Lewis were trying to deal with the leader. And so they said, okay, we've got to have the interpreter go get Sacagawea. So here she comes into the group tent. She comes in, she runs to the leader of, his name was Cameo, throws a blanket over the leader of the Indians. And Clark and Lewis are going, she's gone mad. Cameo was her brother. It was a family reunion. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, it was a family reunion. Did that make it easy getting horses? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, she was that.
We've been out to Fort Plaza, where I always say that. Camp Disappointment, is that all the same thing?
No. Fort Plaza is here. Fort Disappointment is in Idaho.
Okay, got it.
I've camped at Fort Disappointment. It's a disappointment.
That's a good name.
Yep. There's supposed to be a river there. It ain't there. Disappointment. Very much so. Very much so. Any other questions, comments, queries?
I have a personal question. What grade did you teach?
I was with the Deaf Education Program, and so I taught everything from preschool up to 8th grade. I didn't do high school because high schoolers they're aliens. Yeah, from preschool to 8th graders, yeah. I worked with the deaf kids.
You're very good. We're really enjoyed this.
Thank you. As my family says, if we tied Mom's hands, she wouldn't be able to talk.
That's the teacher.
That's the teacher. And I'm very soft-spoken too.
Thank you all for attending today. Renae is well known in Lewis and Clark circles. I happen to be a member of Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation Board, as well as the Humanities Nebraska Board. And she shows up all the time speaking around the state and even further on Lewis and Clark. She graduated from Stromberg High School, got her bachelor's degree from Utah State University, attended Gallaudet University, and is a qualified sign language interpreter. She has been very active in historical reenacting and worked as a museum educator for several years. She's actually traveled the Mormon Trail in 1997 and has followed the Lewis and Clark Trail as a graduate student in the summer of 2003. She's an active speaker on this topic, and please welcome Renae Hunt.
Well, thank you. I just want to get up on my soapbox first. I want to thank the Chautauqua and Norfolk for inviting me, and also for Humanities. I encourage you to write to your legislator, your state legislator, and say thank you. Thank you for supporting the arts. Because if it wasn't for their support, I wouldn't be able to be a part of the Speakers Bureau and go throughout this beautiful state that we have. So thank them for that support. So I'll step off my soapbox. Well, I need to get a little bit of a foundation. As he says, I am a retired teacher. Well, I'm not really retired, I'm just tired. And I don't like microphones, and so I'm assuming you can hear me in the back. Yeah, good. And also, being a teacher, you usually as a teacher, you stand next to the ones that are usually going to be the troublemakers. You're welcome. So if I stand close to you, that's the reason. But I need to get a little bit of a foundation. When you were in school, just a few years ago for some of us, who liked history? Ooh. I hated history. It was names and dates and places that you had to memorize and then regurgitated onto the test, and then you forgot about it, right? Yeah. Boring. I was 14 years old. My mother drugged me on a genealogical hunt through Iowa, Illinois, and into Ohio. We went to libraries, state buildings, county buildings. We were in dusty old basements looking at dirty books. Not those kind of books. Okay. Dusty, musty books. In one of them, we found a probate will for a great uncle of mine that left a pocket watch for his niece because she had taken care of him in his later life. All of a sudden, that man, who was just a name and a date to me, came alive to me. That's when I realized there's stories behind those names and dates and places that I had to memorize. Find out about those stories. So hopefully I'm going to be able to share with you some stories of things that you might not have thought about with the Lewis and Clark Trail. Well, let's start off. First president, and again, I'm a teacher, so I expect responses. First president of the United States. Washington, very good. Second, Adams, very good. I do this to kids, and they always say Lincoln. And the third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. In reading biographies and things, to me, he was one of the greatest presidents that we had. Because when he took presidency, there was 5 million people in the United States. 2/3 of them lived within 50 miles of the ocean. Then there was this big mountain range, and that's where the other third lived. The west coast was the Mississippi River. That was it. That's what it was when Jefferson took office. Well, the thing is, Jefferson had heard that the French and the Spanish were talking about some land issues. And he wanted in on it. Because what they were fighting for was the port of New Orleans. That's where big shipping, that's where cotton would go through and go over to Europe. Big, and he says, if we lose that, we're done. So he sent James Monroe. He says, here's $10 million, go to France and get it. Don't come back without the port of New Orleans. Well, he went over there, and fortunately, because of things going on in history, he ended up making a deal, but not just for the port of New Orleans. French said, nope, It's all or take none. And what it's going to take is the entire Louisiana territory. Anything that watershed goes into that area was considered the Louisiana territory. So he said, all or nothing, but we're going to charge you $15 million. This exceeded the U.S. budget by 3 times. But Monroe's going, he told me not to come back without it. So he made a deal. He came back, $15 million for 820,000 acres. Works out to about 3 cents an acre. Well, not really, because we had to borrow money from England. They gave us 6% interest. In 1803, 6% interest. That's pretty major. That'd be great today, wouldn't it? Now, so now that acreage was 4 cents an acre. Good land deal? Any farmers? Is that a good land deal? Horrible. He had no idea what he had just purchased. No idea. So Jefferson, he said, we've got to get out there. Got to get out there. He said, I've read things. He says, I've heard stories that there's blonde-haired, blue-eyed Indians out there. He says, there's mountains of salt and of silver. We've got to get out there. So he had a secretary. When he took office, when Jefferson took office, he says, I need a secretary. And he had known Meriwether Lewis and said, come be my secretary. So Meriwether Lewis became his secretary. When Jefferson wanted this area explored, he thought of Meriwether Lewis. He was a military guy. He kept his rank even though he was working in the White House. And he says, I want you to go out there. Get some men and get out there and see if there's a waterway to the Pacific Ocean. Easy task, right? Easy task. Well, as he was trying to organize things, he knew he couldn't do it alone. So he had been in the service. He had had a companion that he had met while he was in the military of William Clark. Clark was 4 years older than Meriwether Lewis, but joined and said, come join me on this cruise that we're going to take, okay? And experimenting and exciting trip that we're going to take. And so that's how the two of them went. Now, there's a whole other lecture that we can do on their captainship and things like that, but we're not going to get into that. What we're going to get into is right outside of St. Louis is where they spent the first winter, the winter of 1803. And it was called Camp du Bois. And at this camp, that's where they got all of their soldiers, 27 military men that were not married, healthy, and unattached, like no family or anything. They didn't expect them to come back. Okay, so unattached, but healthy and strong. And remember, we have all of these that were on the other side of the mountain. They were frontiersmen. And that's where a lot of them came from. They had been out in the wilderness. They knew what to expect with the wilderness. Well, while at Camp du Bois, they're loading up their keelboat with supplies and weaponry and things like that. And during that time, they also had, Meriwether Lewis had, and made a purchase of a what? A dog. A Newfoundland. He paid $20. In equivalent money, that's $1,500 today. Okay? He never writes why, or why a dog to accompany them, but let's do a little bit of investigating. Why a Newfoundland? I used to have, my daughter trained Newfoundlands, had a Newfoundland dog, and what they are, in Canada, all of the fishermen, anything nautical, you had a Newfoundland. With the Newfoundland, they have 2 coats of hair. Right up next to the skin is a very short, tight weave of hair, of fur. The outer is a longer, but very oily. So if they're in the water, that water sheds off. And that thin, or that very small, thick coat next to the skin acts as a wetsuit, basically, for them. Their ears are close to their head, and they're rounded and flop down, protecting them so water doesn't get in. Their big flues, the thing that holds every water, and when they shake, drool flies all over the place, okay? What that is protecting them, again, from water, so that water doesn't get into their mouth. Their tail, very strong tail. It becomes their rudder when they are in the water. They don't doggy paddle. They do a modified breaststroke. The fishermen. Now, the thing is, this is a Newfoundland. They come from Newfoundland. It's an island. The main occupation is fisherman. Yeah. So the fisherman's going to go out, take his boat. He's going to take his dog with him. And he's going to get out in that water, and he has his net. He's going to throw that net out into the ocean. And it's got a rope that's hooked there to the boat. In a little bit, what he's going to do is he's going to tie that rope to the dog and throw the dog overboard. Now what that dog is going to do is swim around in a circle and draw that net out. Now he's going to come back to the boat with the net full of fish. Those flues I talked about, that's where the rope is. Those flues drop her down around that rope. Again, not water getting in there. I should have brought mine, I know. Unfortunately, I've lost it. Now, the thing is, so now we've got the fish at the boat. We're going to get the dog in. We're going to get that fish in. And now we're going to go back to land. Once we hit land, we're going to get our cart. We're going to take that fish and put it in the cart. And who's going to be in front of that cart? The Newfoundland. They can pull 3 to 4 times their weight. So they're strong in the water and off. They're also a very protective animal. Very protective breed. About a decade ago, I was here in Norfolk at the library doing a program just like this. It was for young children and families. I had a gentleman that was sitting over on the edge, and they had brought the entire family and had a 3-year-old. And she started fussing like normal 3-year-olds, okay? Dad, to help protect so that everybody else could hear, grabbed her, not aggressively, but grabbed her and headed to the back of the room. I had to hold my dog because he's going, "You're not hurting that child." He was concerned that that child was going to get hurt because they're very protective. Didn't know this child from anything, but very protective. So, knowing those facts, why do we think Lewis purchased this dog, or purchased this dog for this adventure? They're going to be on water. They're loyal. He's going to be great on land. They're kind of a hunter. They're maybe flush out animals or whatever. So we don't know why. Meriwether Lewis never writes. But knowing about a Newfoundland, we can kind of make some guesses. Just a bit of trivia. The Titanic that went down, there was a Newfoundland on board there. His name was Rigel. Again, Newfoundlands, and he saved And there's documentation, he saved over 70 people and drugged them to something that was floating. Okay? But then, you know, we don't know anything after that. So, the dog. It was Lewis's dog. And the men that wrote journals referred to it as the captain's dog. The captain's dog did this. But as the time went on, 18 months, it became our dog. The dog. They all took ownership. If any of you have had an animal, I don't care what size, you become quite attached to them, right? Well, so not only was he good in the water and things like that, but he became a companion. He also, when he stood up on his hind legs, he was over 6.5 feet. Okay? He scared away a bear because he reared up and barked to scare the bear away. Again, that protective agency with a Newfoundland. Well, coming back, the last time we hear about him is when they're up in the mountains in Montana. The mosquitoes were horrific. Almost anybody that was writing journals said the mosquitoes are so bad. We can't sleep at night because the mosquitoes are horrible. And even some of them said, the mosquitoes are so bad, the dog cries. He has 2 coats of hair. Could you imagine how bad the mosquitoes had to be? That's the last time we hear about the Newfoundland. Seaman. If anybody read books that were published before 1960, they thought the dog's name was Sacagawea. Because Clark, who was the majority of the journal writing, was a horrible speller. And he spelled things incorrectly or abbreviated, and they thought it was. But then they found out because everything was named, not everything, a majority was named after people in the Corps. And so all of a sudden they came across a Seaman Creek, S-E-A-M-A-N. They're going, what? Well, Sacagawea, by looking at Clark's writing, was Seaman. So we have Seaman. That's the last we hear about him. But my grandma always said, no news is good news. If the men took pride in calling it our dog, if something bad would have happened, I can't imagine that they wouldn't have written about it. So in my hopeful estimation, he made it back to St. Louis. After that, of course, we know nothing, because he doesn't write any journals. But a Newfoundland a life of a Newfoundland is only about 10 years. We don't know how old he was when Meriwether purchased him, so we don't know how long he did live. But we're hoping. Now my question is, and I'll repeat this question. He didn't get paid for anything, except maybe a few pets, a few scratches. Of course, he got fed just along with the men. But what was his value? Hope, protection. Oh, I like that hope one. Companionship. Was it worth the $20? Yeah. So we have a 4-legged creature that was one of our first members of the Corps. Well, he was owned by Meriwether Lewis. We have another member that was owned by William Clark, and that was York, the slave. Okay? Clark and Lewis were both 6 feet tall. Both of them wrote, "The black man was taller than they were. Now, Clark, he kind of inherited him. York and Clark grew up together. And then Clark's father gave him York when Clark became an adult. So York became his body servant. Not bodyguard, body servant, which meant he laid out his clothes. When he traveled, he would travel with Clark. He would do things for Clark. And so it became his body servant. Lived in the house wherever Clark would have lived. So we have Clark with York. And so he's going on this adventure. You're darn right, he's going to take York with him. As a slave, they're not able to administer medicine. They are not allowed to know how to hunt. They are not allowed to operate a gun. So now we have this black man heading up the Missouri River with the Corps of Discovery. As much work as the men were doing to get that keelboat upstream, each man would have to eat 40 to 50 pounds of meat a day. A day, in order to keep up the muscle mass and needed that much protein. They're not going to take it with because there's no refrigeration, so what are they going to have to do every day? Hunt. We have this very able-bodied man. They're going to teach him how to hunt. He learned from one of the best shots, and they taught him how to hunt. And he became very proficient at it. So, he now has that freedom, where back home he wouldn't. Also, as we're going up the Missouri River, we're getting a little bit closer to where Sioux City is today, and a gentleman, one of the sergeants, gets ill. Captain Floyd. Sergeant Floyd, I should say. And he gives him some medicine to help him ease his pain and trying to get him better. Now, we lost Sergeant Floyd, of course, but what did he get to do that he couldn't do back home? Practice medicine. Also, later on, when they're in the Rocky Mountains, he administers and finds sulfa water for someone else and administers that. Oh, back in the States, blacks cannot vote. So York had all of these privileges out here. Also, they ran into many Indian tribes. They had never seen a black man. They would go up to him, lick their fingers, and rub to see if it would come off. And he would just laugh. He would part his hair and show him it was just as dark there, too. He was very strong. He's taller than 6 feet. He could stand flat-footed and do backflips. Two of the young whips were fighting, and they wrote that York picked them up by the scruff of the neck, and they were both off of the ground. That's a lot of strength. The Indians called him Big Medicine. The leaders of many of the Indian tribes would bring their women to him, wanting that magic. You get my drift, okay? They wanted that energy. They wanted that huge power. And so he became fascinated. And he loved to be around the children in these Indian tribes. They didn't know each other's language, but he could act out a story. He would become a bear, or he would just, and the men wrote about that the children were just giddy and laughing at his stories. So he was a great asset. As they're traveling, they finally get to the east or the west coast, and they have to make a decision on if they want to make their camp closer to the ocean or a little bit further back, so that it's not quite so wet and damp. So they put it up to a vote to the men. He doesn't get to vote back in the United States. Does the black man get to decide between ocean or further away? Yes. First time in American history that a black man's opinion counted. Okay? So, we have them coming back. They get back to St. Louis, and all of the men, all of the soldiers, get acreage and extra pay. What does York get? Nothing. Not even his freedom. But no. Don't look at Clark through our 21st century eyes. 1806, when they got back. Still, black men cannot hunt, cannot use a gun, cannot administer medicine, can't even have business dealings with a white person. So keeping him as a slave was Clark's thinking, that's the best thing for you. Do you not understand? But for 2 years, almost 2 years, he had tasted freedom, and he wanted that freedom. After many years of debate and trying different things, Clark said, fine, and even helped him set up a dray wagon business. But again, a freed slave cannot have any dealings with another slave or white men. Is his business going to flourish?
Yeah.
No. So that's where York kind of disappears. There are different stories. I'm not going to tell you which one to believe. I'm going to give you a couple, and then you make a decision. One is that he went back to Clark and actually on the way contracted diphtheria and died. The other one is that he lost his business and went back up into the Rocky Mountains and lived out his years with the Crow people. Don't know. We do not know because again, he could not write, and so we do not have any type of journals to verify what happened to York. But, again, my question I pose, was he valuable to the core? And why? Why was he valuable? Protection again? Yeah. He was a companion. The Indians. Wow, look at this thing coming down the river. But again, nothing for those efforts. Brings us to our third one. This one they meet up a little bit later. They meet up after being on the river for almost a year. And as they were at Fort Mandan up in North Dakota, they were talking with the Hidatsa and Mandan Indians going, okay, we're going to have to go across mountains. And the Indians are going, you need horses to do that because you're going to run out of river. So you're going to need horses to get over the mountains. You're going to need to deal with the Indians to get those horses. And Lewis and Clark go, who are we going to be dealing with? And they knew, what you're going to do is you're going to be dealing with Shoshone most likely. And they're going, we need somebody that can speak Shoshone. This is where a young lady comes into their life. This young lady was born in, get out my trusty map here, was born in the Idaho, Wyoming area. At about the age of 11, some Hadatzes and Mandan came over and raided while they were on a hunting party and stole some of the Shoshone women, drugged them back to North Dakota at 11 years old. Okay? Now, our young lady was a smart young lady. She grew up Shoshone, but she is now property of the Hadatzes. She learns their language quite quickly. She also endeared herself to them that they gave her a belt of blue beads. Blue beads are the most valuable because blue is very hard to come by in nature. And so a blue beaded belt was, just a wonderful gift. And the Hadatzes had given that to her. Well, at the age of 14, she becomes wife of a French-Canadian fur trader, Toussaint Charbonneau. Well, back to now Lewis and Clark, looking for a Shoshone speaker, Toussaint Charbonneau says, I've got the answer. I have a woman that speaks Shoshone. Take me and we'll get you there. He goes, okay, we'll take you. He said, I don't speak Shoshone. I speak Hidatsa, and I can translate to Shoshone. So you need to take both me and my woman. And Lewis and Clark going, I ain't taking no woman. No, we're not taking a woman. And he says, then you're not going to deal with the Shoshone because that's the only way. So they reconsidered, and they thought, okay, we're going to have to do that. They get introduced to this young, about 15, 16 years old, and they find out that she is expecting. Now this complicates even more, but they know they have to. February 11th of 1805, she has a son, Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau. That next April, she packs up her baby on a willow board wrapped in skins, puts the baby on her back, and heads west with a permanent party of 32 men. Now, she is a bright young woman. She is very level-headed. Many books, statues call her a guide and an interpreter. Okay, let's get a few facts under our belt here. 11 years old when she was drugged from her home to North Dakota. No road signs, no Interstate 90. Is she going to find her way home? No. So is she a guide? No. She's not a guide. I love the statue where she's pointing and Lewis and Clark are over here. I keep saying I want to put a caption under there going, I'm going to go over there and do something personal. You stay here. She did not point the way. The only time she pointed the way is when they got close to Beaver Head Rock. Looks like a beaver. This is at Three Forks River, and this is where she was stolen from. She recognized the place. She did not guide them. She recognized it going, Beaver Head Rock. This is where I was stolen from. Shoshone, just that way. One time, she pointed the way. Okay? Not a guide. Interpreter, let's discuss that one. She only speaks Shoshone, and Hidatsa. At one point, they deal with the Shoshone, we'll get there, but also they deal with the Nez Perce Indians. This is how the translation went. Meriwether spoke English to Pierre Crissat. Pierre spoke English and French. Pierre then spoke French to Toussaint Charbonneau. Charbonneau speaks French and Hidatsa. Then he speaks Hidatsa to Sacagawea. Then she speaks Shoshone to a slave that the Nez Perce had that speaks Shoshone and Nez Perce. That was just one way. However many have you played telephone? Could you imagine how this went? Back and forth through 5 interpreters. Yes, she interpreted. I will give her full credit for that. But she's just one in this cog.